Welcome back, folks, to the Unfound Podcast Channel. Unfound on the Ground. As always, I'm here a little bit early just to make sure my sight and sound are in order. And I have tried this time and I'm learning still aspects of this YouTube platform. But I tried putting the chats up ahead of time with the disclaimers. And so I think they're there. And I'll read them when we start. So again, we've not officially begun. We have about 5 minutes to go. This part makes it to the live video. That's okay. And so hope everybody is doing okay if you're joining us early. But we still have 5 minutes. And I'm going to just do a few preliminaries here, including posting, because I'll be mentioning it, the link for the playlist for the Unfound on the Ground series, which is there. Okay, so folks who join us will see that in chat. Of course, with this YouTube platform, audience participation takes place with chat. So we have about 4 minutes. So I'm just here again, just making sure everything's in order. Technically, if you're watching this video after it's recorded and distributed by Ed, you'll see this first 5 minutes, which is okay. I think. Of course, I don't handle the technical side, but regardless, we start pretty much on time, sharp. So this episode, we're doing a different day. We're trying some different timing. So this is Saturday, December 4th, and we're going to be starting at 3 p.m. Eastern time. And so that's where we're at. So I'm in the Mountain Time zone, getting close to 1 o'clock Mountain Time here. And so I'm just making sure there are no questions for me here, at least on Facebook. Don't have email up right now. Again, we just have a few minutes till we begin. Okay, sorry about that. I was testing the actual link. So you might have heard some echo there. Again, I'll wait till we start officially to read the disclaimers. I have posted, and I'll mention this when we start, I've posted the playlist for, just a little preliminary content here. I've posted the playlist for the Unfound on the Ground through the YouTube channel. I'm also now posting 2 other links. I'll mention these. These are episodes. All of our episodes are relevant consistently, but there's 2 episodes in particular, 9 and 10, that I want us to keep in mind. If you've not seen those, the links are there. I'll mention those, but I'm trying to get that out there. So it looks like my test work before I go live when I'm in the studio section. And as some of you may recall, if you're involved live as a think tank member, or you watch these videos, that we shifted from using Zoom as a platform to YouTube Live. And so there were some things, obviously, I had to get acclimated with. But again, I tried to get those chats with the disclaimers out ahead of time, which I will read anyway. So We have about a minute, then we will officially begin. If you have any sound concerns, if there are any tech problems, I have, please, in the chat, go ahead and let me know. That would be helpful. And I'm just going to make sure that my microphone is here in a place where it's getting good pickup. And that seems to be the case. So welcome as you're tuning in here. Again, if you're watching this live, participating as a think tank member through the Unfound Podcast at Denzel and the team, or if you're watching this later, I always have a little bit of that preliminary content here on YouTube just to get here early and to get things set up. So it's now 1 o'clock. So we are going to begin. So I have the disclaimers in the chat, and let me just get through that like usual. And we do think it's important, Ed and the team, including myself. So we have, this is episode 15 of Unfound on the Ground, forensic science for missing persons cases, right? This will be recorded, video and audio, including the text chat. Chat participation is an option. And for the journalistic, promotional, and or commercial purposes of Unfound, the audio and video recording, including the text chat, of this digital meeting will be distributed by Unfound. By participating in this digital meeting, you agree to give Unfound permission to use the rendering of your words for journalistic, promotional, and or commercial purposes, with no compensation to you from Unfound, its assistants, its affiliates, its partners, etc. So you have that in the chat. I'm Eric Grabowski. I've been a guest once on Unfound, part of the assisting team of Unfound. I am beyond my main work as a teacher and scholar of communication. Hello, Kathy. In academia, I do some cold case freelance journalism on the side. And so my usual disclaimer, right? My words, my views expressed here today do not necessarily represent the views of my employing academic institution. You're free to give any disclaimers that you see fit. Kathy, I hope you're doing well. I'm just going through some of the usual. I have posted links for the playlist for Unfound on the Ground. That has the previous episodes that have been released. You know, we use a time frame. We make these episodes. We involve our think tank members. Then the episode gets released after a period of time. Please go back and watch episodes you haven't seen. Share that playlist. I shared the link also for Unfound on the Ground to episode 9, Why People Go Missing, and episode 10, Public Perceptions of Missing Persons Cases. Of course, all of our episodes hopefully have some connections and continuity. But I think those two in particular, as we think about the big picture of forensic science in missing persons cases, in the larger, bigger picture of solving and reporting on missing persons cases, those episodes might be helpful, and hopefully we'll see why. I'm going to just take a look here. So we have Kathy, and if anyone else gets here, please check in. So when we think about forensic science and then missing persons cases, of course, in conversation with Ed and just listening to Ed, but I think it's important to emphasize obviously there are some challenges or some gaps when we think about the ways in which we think about forensic science, and then as it relates to missing persons cases. And I'm here specifically thinking about forensic science, and I'll make this clarification in a moment. because oftentimes, depending on the case, right, we might have more or less, um, human or other elements available to do any sort of forensic investigation. Now, that may come later, of course. That varies. So depending on the circumstances, depending upon the person or persons involved, depending upon the facts of the matter and the ways in which facts are attempting to be discerned, right? There may be certain challenges or gaps with regard to forensic science. Let me mention on the front end, and just by way of example, of course, one that's one that I've often mentioned, a case that was on Unfound back in 2017. Evelyn Hartley, where Ed interviewed Anthony, or Sherlock, as he goes on his blog, or did go on his blog, right? That's a case where, right, you have aspects of the case, clues, evidence, potential evidence, etc., that could be a matter of forensic science investigation. Yeah, you could also have a case, and of course, I'm sharing here the Unfound episode, also from 2017. Donna Michaelenko, right, from North Dakota, in which I was a guest. Of course, to this point in time, even as of today, right, there's been no body found. Now in these sorts of cases, of course, through the years, as we know with these cases, law enforcement might look in particular areas and have certain things in mind that would directly or eventually pertain to forensic scientific study. And there may be, in these cases, forensic aspects on the front end, generally speaking. And again, I'll get to clarifications on that term in a second. Right. So, but that said, right, that's an example of a case where you're not going to have, what we're used to thinking about in terms of forensic science, right? It's not going to be as readily available. Want to make some other recommendations here. Very insightful. And let me mention too, although I'm in academia, I am not a criminologist, not a forensic scientist, not a social scientist even. I find these things interesting. In doing any sort of cold case journalism, you have to be familiar with these sorts of things and be reading and thinking and researching and networking along these lines. But I want to be very, very clear that I do not bring to the table what a Grace Telesco brings to the table, for instance. Well, I think Ed is a good example of someone who has, with his background in media and communication, and he's a smart guy, right? But has done, research and networking and programming that he has diligently acquired expertise. I want to, for think tank members, I want to recommend here, Ed has shared, presentations that he's done, and I'm not going to share the links here because that's not my place, but Northwestern State University, the think tank members have access to this. But that will give you an example, obviously, of Ed's level of expertise. And those who know the program know that. But also, I want to, again, to the big picture of things, why people go missing. Why people go missing, right? We've talked in so many episodes about the different ways of doing research and analysis and understanding why people go missing. Obviously, at least in the first of, I've watched number one, I've not watched number two, and I've not watched number one thoroughly enough, but I have there's really some great highlights in there thinking through the sort of the aspects or types of considerations for missing persons cases. So I'm not sharing those links because that's not this place to do that. But again, if you're a think tank member, you've had access to that. I also want to recommend, and we know that Ed has done some collaborations with Dr. Grace Telesco. Sorry, my apologies. And on the website, and again, I've neglected to mention, as I usually do, the unfoundpodcast.com, the unfoundpodcast.com. Go to that website often, share that link. That's the website for the Unfound brand, platform, framework, right? I've used these various terms. Now, for our work today, I want to, in particular, right, mention the interview, the collaboration, discussion that Dr. Telesco and Ed did about Janelle Matthews, and I'm sharing that link here. That's featured on the page I just sent, but that's important, to watch on its own. I did drop the YouTube link there. I noticed some people here on just watching some live content and taped content on YouTube areas. People talk about dropping the link, at least one person there in the chat. So I'm dropping links, as one says. So that's a term that I'm, I guess, borrowing. But anyway, point is that page is important. Again, big picture of really with Dr. Telesco and Ed, seeing that good collaboration, and my theme, collaboration is key, between criminology and journalism and thinking through cases, and that Janelle Matthews discussion, again, really focusing on facts. Now, I'll mention in a second here, that particular case is relevant to what we're thinking about. Might as well mention it now, right? Janelle, 1984, disappearance, 2019, right? Then you have remains. And so now we're into a situation where something in terms of an escalation, or really, again, where forensic science in particular is and can be relevant then as you're trying to piece together what we learn and know about a case in the various levels and avenues, right? So that I really encourage you to listen to that Janelle Matthews discussion between Dr. Telesco and Ed Densel. And we have, and again, I shared the paste from the unfoundpodcast.com. And of course, Dr. Telesco is affiliated with the Nova Southeastern University in Florida, Fischler College of Education and School of Criminal Justice. So go ahead and please take a look at that. But again, that's a situation there where we see where forensic science eventually. Kathy, have you had a chance to watch that particular discussion between Ed and Dr. Telesco, or look into that case at all? And if not, that's okay. I'm just curious to make sure that if you have a okay. So I'm going to keep going, but Kathy, chime in when you can, no problem. So take a look at that. I think that's important. Again, you see that again. Janelle goes missing, 1984. 2019 remains are found, right? And so with, like I had mentioned earlier, right, with a variety of missing persons cases, right, there's going to be I've studied that case thoroughly, all the stuff, great. So you have a sense of what I'm talking about in terms of with that time frame and how aspects of the forensic science, right, certainly can later become important. I do want to clarify some terms, folks. Again, I am not a criminologist. I'm not a forensic scientist. However, let me say, over the years in academia, I've had some conversations with folks across disciplines, and just talking to them, even if they're not necessarily criminologists or forensic scientists, but they are doing things in criminology. But learning some things about just the ways in which criminology, criminal justice, forensic science are taught and handled. Obviously, I've done some reading on my own, over the years. Newer reading for this episode. This is, again, I'm not an expert in this area, but it's very important if you're doing any sort of journalism, publicizing, advocacy. You got to have a sense of, in my view, what's going on. But there are a range of areas of insight that are important. Obviously, the sciences, biology, chemistry, physics, so forth. Various social behavioral sciences are important, right? Anthropology, criminology, sociology, and psychology, so forth. Of course, there's a wide way of ranging of approaching psychology, right? In terms of social behavioral sciences, philosophical approaches, so forth. Okay, so that matters to understand that. So there's a lot to this, a lot of nuance. Let me clarify a term, though. So this is where there is a crossover area for me. So as some of you know, right, as a communication teacher and scholar, my background is in rhetoric, right, classical rhetoric, argumentation. So we talk about forensics, ID programs. Great, yeah, and this is it. And this is and that's why I mentioned public perceptions of cases, Kathy, right? Because we are informed by what happens in media, fiction and nonfiction, and many of that, much of that can be helpful in terms of raising awareness about specific cases, right, in a way that's influenced many of us. So when we talk about forensic science, okay, we're speaking specifically, of course, about scientific aspects of studying things with regard to crime. And we'll get into specifics, because one of our questions is, what is it and what does it entail? But let me mention it on this notion of forensic, right? Going back to classical antiquity, particularly in terms of, and I have Aristotle in mind here primarily, the genres of rhetoric, okay? And let me just mention of the three that he discussed in the rhetoric. So one of them is forensic, for which the technical home is the courtroom. As a general matter, then, these are arguments about things that have happened, obviously issues of fact, but then certainly implications or interpretations of that, right? And then that could be guilt or innocence in a courtroom. I guess in a civil trial, that's, liability or not. But particularly, we're thinking about the possibility of criminal sorts of things, although certainly in missing persons cases, there civil matters could be on the table. I rarely watch any fiction crime dramas because they're so hokey. Much prefer the real cases, and that's an important insight for sure. But the or media effect, right? Public perceptions of missing persons cases. So we talk about this. So the idea is that so as a general matter, right? But the technical home is the courtroom, and so you have to persuade juries and or judges depending upon the situation. And so, with regard to forensic science, so it's involved in gathering and analyzing evidence that will at some point be used, right, in a court, right, so as to make a case, right? So in the American system, of course, we have innocent until proven guilty. The obligation is on the government, whatever level that government is, to make their case, right, beyond a reasonable doubt. In the case of a criminal trial, it's obviously a different standard of evidence in a civil trial. Again, I'm not a lawyer. We're not giving legal advice here, but we're talking about things that people generally ought to be aware of. And so in the case of that forensic science work, right, there's a constant assessment, right, and we see this on television and so forth, but in real life too, right, of by police, by prosecutors and so forth, of right quality of evidence with respect to making a case, right? So there is that. So when we talk about forensic persuasion, forensic argument, right, it's pertaining to that. And so with any case, even missing persons cases, there could be various forensic aspects to it. But specifically with regard to forensic science, right? Of course, I've mentioned some of the challenges with that already in missing persons cases, and we'll talk more about that. But as a general matter, with any crime or alleged crime, right, there is the sense of, hey, you're still having to gather evidence, analyze evidence, consider evidence that could be potentially used in an argument in a trial setting, right? So that's this idea of forensics. So that's a crossover, and I could go on and on about this, but I'm going to stop. But understanding that, and again, Aristotle's rhetoric, there are various translations. I am just sharing here just some resources that if you're interested in studying this more, right? I've cited before once this article, Eugene Garver, Demystifying Classical Rhetoric. It's a helpful. If you don't have access to JSTOR, you won't be able to read it online probably. But if you have a local library or an academic library that you're have access to, but that, if you remember, if I think I talked about it right, we talk about like when solving a crime, right? Detectives, prosecutors, court of law, right? You're looking at the ways of building arguments. You're thinking of certain questions that guide sort of what's the issue, in gathering those sorts of things, right? And then you're using those areas of inquiry, right? Who benefits and so forth, right? Depending on the crime. Of course, when we talk about missing persons cases, we sort of go to the notion of crime, and unfortunately, that's part of it. As we've talked about before, there certainly are times where, in and of itself, someone disappearing on their own there's not necessarily a crime involved, right? Now, in certain cases, right, it's not necessarily illegal to choose to disappear and change your life, move somewhere, and so forth. Now, if that involves fraud or those sorts of things, obviously that could involve, criminal and or civil situations. Of course, we also want to mention, and I just thought of this now, suicide prevention is important, and really advocating for that and making sure that resources are available, because, unfortunately, that can be a part of grappling with missing persons cases. So we're talking specifically about forensic science. I wanted to highlight that connection for sure. And again, I could go on and on about that. But so with the science part of it, right, we're thinking through, right, this analysis of finding and analysis of evidence. But at some point, that's going to have to make it to a place where arguments are made, where you're dealing with hearings and actual cases being argued in court. So that's an overlap or connection. But again, I'm not a criminologist. I'm not a forensic scientist. Want to make that clear. When we talk about what is forensic science, Kathy, I'm going to come back to you before I start going on here. So when you think about forensic science, in general, even not with regard to missing persons cases, right? What comes to mind? What does it entail? What is it from your experience or your study, your view? And while Kathy's getting a chance to type, I'm just going to mention that I have some sources here that I'll share in terms of just giving some credible definitions of what forensic science is and what we might call scope, and so forth. Right, for sure. And I'll keep that going. I have a page here from the Department of Justice. And by the way, when we talk about resources today, these initial or front end things that I'm sharing can be helpful too, just as resources for learning about it, which is some of the page links and even references that are provided. So this is from the Department of Justice, justice.gov, and I've shared the actual link. And I'm just looking on this page, and I'll just quote here from this page, Forensic Science, United States Department of Justice. Forensic scientists examine and analyze evidence from crime scenes and elsewhere to develop objective findings that can assist in the investigation and prosecution of perpetrators of crime or absolve an innocent person from suspicion. That's something important to keep in mind, right, for sure. And I'm just going through the list here, right? It's talking about common forensic science laboratory disciplines, forensic molecular biology, right, DNA, forensic chemistry, trace evidence examination, hairs and fibers, etc., latent fingerprint examination, firearms and tool marks examination, handwriting analysis, fire and explosive examination, forensic toxicology, and digital evidence. And I'm not going to keep going. Well, I'll mention a few others things here. Some forensic disciplines practiced outside forensics laboratory include forensic pathology, forensic nursing, forensic psychiatry, forensic entomology, and forensic engineering. Practitioners of these disciplines are most often found in medical examiners or coroner offices, in universities, or in private practices. Okay. Now, if you scroll down on the site that I sent, you'll see there's a variety of resources there. If you're interested, that's a resource too. Okay, and that provides a definition. Kathy, forensic science is the study and application of physical evidence from crime scenes that can be analyzed and used in prosecuting perpetrators and reach conclusion. That's obviously a major part of it. Obviously, yeah, and that's really sort of the driving force, right? And to touch upon what you said, and then what the DOJ site said, right? To develop objective findings, right? That's important. I have another site here, National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST.gov. And I'll share the link. It's a page here on forensic science, and it's a good resource too. But I think it gives us a good sort of overview, or with some topics again. And you'll see ballistics, DNA and biological evidence, fingerprints and pattern evidence, digital evidence. Obviously, nowadays, digital forensics have become very important. Drugs and toxicology, trace evidence. But here, what is forensic science? So I'm on this NIST.gov page. And I'm just quoting the website. Forensic science is the use of scientific methods or expertise to investigate crimes or examine evidence that might be presented in a court of law. Okay, so they mentioned variety of disciplines, from fingerprint and DNA analysis to anthropology and wildlife forensics. Varied disciplines, common challenges. Here's some important questions. How do you ensure, and this is again from this site, how do you ensure that forensic methods produce reliable results? How do you communicate findings to a jury or other non-experts in a way that is accurate and understandable? How do you keep up with new technology without falling behind on casework? Meeting these and other challenges is critical to ensuring that forensic science remains a powerful force in support of justice and public safety. All right, so that's from the NIST.gov. So when we think about forensic science and what it entails, it is a significant area in terms of scope. I was thinking about this episode, and I have probably thought about this before, but in particular in the lead up. So we again back to expertise, actual expertise. So as I mentioned before, I like to think I'm a pretty competent amateur genealogist, right? I'm pretty good at family history research. And then I've been able to apply some of that research and analysis skill to my interest in doing freelance cold case journalism. And that's important. But if I were to, and who knows, would I ever do this? I'm not sure. Would it probably, be something that continues, I hope, to strengthen my interest in cold cases in general and missing persons cases in particular? Absolutely. So, there are people doing forensic genealogy. There are people that, and we know of cases where, genealogists, and obviously DNA databasing has become a big part of this. And that's certainly part of that expertise. But of course, when you're getting into, again, forensic aspects of cases, right? And this, goes back to work that Ed's talked about and we've talked about and others, right? The big picture of getting at the facts and making well-informed connections and, not even hypothesizing or theorizing without good ground, right? So even making reasonable inferences. You're looking at documentary evidence. You're talking to people to the extent possible. Of course, those sorts of things that are scientific, such as available DNA information and so forth, can be quite valuable. So someone who's truly doing forensic genealogical work, right, at a professional level, academically, in law enforcement, as consulting, freelancing, whatever, in that area, would be really ascertaining sort of and learning and applying related areas of, scientific and genealogical knowledge. So that I'm not sure if I'd ever go that route, but I can see, right, just as someone who is I believe to be pretty competent as an amateur genealogist, and then I've been able to apply some of that knowledge in sort of the mix of freelance cold case journalism. But then, sort of seeing that area, right, is something that's interesting and significant. And again, I'm not a criminologist or a forensic scientist. We also hear about the Csi Effect. Csi Effect. And again, this is probably one of those things, thinking back, years, talking to at least one, if two, maybe more colleagues in academia who do know more about these things, mentioning that to me. And admittedly, I'm someone who has watched various fiction crime programs over the years. And yes, Kathy, I agree. We have to be cautious with that. And the real cases are better. But there is this idea of the Csi Effect. Kathy, you mentioned their homeschool all 4 of her children. Can you give me a little context on that, just as I move through things? So, there is some controversy about it, but as a general matter, and I'm just going to give a quick definition here, and you can, and I'm actually going to share some searches here. So basically, obviously, as a general matter, oh yeah, the comment above it. And I didn't see forensic science is the perpetrators and reach conclusions, homeschool, full virtual. There might have been something that didn't make it through, Kathy. And so that might have been a problem, and I apologize for that. But if there's something you want to provide more, let me know. But let me say this. So as a general matter, just thinking about influence of media, and of course, as a communication person, I think about that. It's not an area, media effects are not an area of expertise of mine, but academically, but I'm aware of it and teach it and talk about it. And think about it is okay. Thank you, Kathy. Please do retype it at your pace, So I think about these things, and so we watch programs, and of course the idea of CSI and the shows, Law and Order, and so forth. That obviously gives us perspectives. There's an influence on it. And so out of that idea or that influence, right, we get an idea or a view of what happens in the world of crime scene investigation, forensic science, even outside of that, police rooms, prosecutorial offices, and courtrooms. That gives people a view of what happens in policing and in attorney work and courtrooms and CSI work. Now you'll see then that certain audiences can be affected by that in terms of those perceptions or perspectives on the work of forensic science in particular. And then one concern in particular are jurors, right? Jurors and how that might impact them. Now, there is some controversy about that. I'm not going to go too deep into that here. However, just for your own time, if you want to take some time and do some research, I'll just share two searches from Google and then Google Scholar if you want to read more about it. It is interesting. It is important to consider in terms of media effects on particular audiences. Obviously, as someone who's interested in rhetoric and persuasion, media and otherwise, courtroom and otherwise, it's something that I should find interesting. But again, we've thought about public perceptions of missing persons cases, why people go missing. I don't think we've really talked too much about CSI effect in the past. But it is something worth mentioning here in terms of the idea of forensic science that people have, right? And what that is. Now, there's no question that the television programming and so forth has heightened that awareness, just as in the past, radio and TV programs about policing, whether it be Dragnet or others, sort of raised awareness. But again, we have to be able to sort through what represents what is happening or should happen or has happened outside of the fiction media world and not. I guess this is similar to nonfiction programs, a different sphere, but a similar idea, right? We've talked before, and again, Ed and the team and Unfound audience and here in Unfound on the ground, the idea that, even things that are out there in nonfiction programming, we have to consistently be analyzing and correcting inaccuracies and so forth. Okay. And again, take your time, Kathy. I'll be on the look for that. So definitely wanted to mention the CSI effect. And if there's more you want to read about that, I've shared the just two searches there that you might find helpful as you sort through for credible sources. So I'm just giving Kathy a chance to type, and I'm going to start sort of shifting here into specifically for missing persons cases. Now, we've already mentioned again that there are, sort of the large set of the missing persons cases and the type of missing persons cases, right? Specifically forensic science. Right, there are going to be gaps or challenges because of the nature and scope of the various types of missing persons cases. Again, want to go through here now more specifically. Obviously, the area where you see a lot of important work is, and this is part of solving these crimes, but still at times dealing with either somewhere from substantive to scant information. So where you are going to see sort of the work of forensic science overlapping with other areas of study for solving missing persons cases. And of course, one of the resources we talk about, of course, NamIt, and I'm not going to go too deeply into that here. We're familiar with it, right? We're familiar with it. Is of course the trying to coordinate what we might know about a missing person's case with unidentified remains, right? That's certainly an area. Okay, the first forensics programs my daughter and I watched many years ago: FBI files, investigative reports, forensic files. Yes. Yeah, and I, of course, and I'll mention here, and it's not, I guess, only a forensics program, but if you came up in a certain time, unsolved mysteries. Now that entailed a variety of things, but I won't mention. Well, there are a number of cases there, and it's certainly a cultural reference point. And I won't mention the case here, but there, and I remember, and of course I'm from southwestern PA, Pittsburgh area, and I remember there was a time when even a case that was probably from around 1980, there was a murder case just outside of Pittsburgh, actually in the area not too far from where I grew up. And I think over time that, and I'm not mentioning the case because I don't have the timeline square in my head right now, that there may or may not been close to solving the crime or whatever, but there were always certain questions about the circumstances, and I think even today in some people's minds those questions persist, and they may or may not be valid. I don't know, but that was a big deal, and of course there's so many cases. But yeah, I mean, these programs, these nonfiction programs, of course, raise awareness. And again, they should be questioned too. We should be always making sure there's accurate information, even as we debate, hypothesize, theorize, and so forth. Right? We want good grounding, know the facts. Right? So yeah. So obviously the DNA has provided, and I have you can see here, right? Just different ways. In this site here, I have Minnesota Department of Public Safety, Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, right? You can see that, there are ways out there that, government entities and others are collaborating to, think about ways, again, of coordinating, get back to the big picture, coordinating the work of finding out what facts are available, making as reasonable and grounded inferences as possible, and just working hard to see what connections could be made. So again, coordinating information about remains with information about missing persons, which again, when you're dealing with these things, you're somewhere on the spectrum from scant to substantive, depending on the case. I just shared here, just let me make sure I got that clear. Yeah, I just shared an interesting discussion that's from the ojp.gov, which I believe we've mentioned before. Yeah, Office of Justice Programs, U.S. Department of Justice, and it was just an overview discussion, solving missing persons cases. That's from that was from issue number 264 from a while ago, but it still has some insightful discussion. And obviously, just like any research, scientific advances continue to happen. The same challenges and struggles continue to happen. Good old-fashioned research methods are always going to be important in analysis. And obviously, in missing persons cases, we really see that crossroads because, again, some of the information we have is somewhere on that spectrum from scant to substantive, for sure. Yeah, I think some of the comments didn't make it through, and I'm not sure if that's an internet issue. And I have it on live chat, so it should come through. You should see live chat at the top of your screen, Kathy. Tell me if you don't see that right above the chat. It should say live chat. That's the setting I have. So I don't know if the comments aren't coming through. If that's an internet issue, and I'm going to, so I apologize for that. That's not necessarily something that I'm doing. That could be a tech issue. But if there's anything you want to relate, and I don't want to have you keep typing over and over, Kathy, but I think I'm getting the gist of what you're trying to say. For sure. So one of the things when I talk about the big picture, and this certainly involves forensic science, forensic aspects of a case, and I have an article Forensic Science International 2021, range of authors, but I'm going to share the link. In the search process, integrating the investigation and identification of missing and identified and unidentified persons. Let me, I don't know why 7 of those comments, and I apologize for that, Kathy. Not sure why that's not coming through. There's no way that I can test for that here. That could be an internet problem on my end. Is it showing up on your side of the chat? Because it's not showing here. And as you can imagine, just by being here, kind of control the live stream, I got to be careful where I go and what I do. But I apologize for that, for sure. This article, and it's the full text is available here, at least as of now, through the Science Direct. And so we talk about the big picture and some things that are, particularly mentioned. I'm not going to read through every part. I encourage you to do that. But, besides just thinking about, obviously there are things mentioned in this article that we've talked about in terms of cultural issues, locational issues, really understanding the context of an area. The other thing that, and this is important for, whether it be police, lawyers, again, I'm not a lawyer, journalists, advocates, collaboration is important. But what I like from here too, we're talking about the difficulties of forensic science. Okay, what I'm going to do, Kathy, is I'm going to take a moment here and I'm going to have to go to this. I'm going to open the YouTube page. I'm going to silence it. Okay. Okay, now I'm looking on the live page and it might not be showing. And I'm going to put on live chat there. Here we go. And let's see. Kathy just is yep, it's not showing other than the ones I've mentioned, the comments I've mentioned that I've been able to read. It's not showing on the live page. So for some reason, it's not coming through. And again, I apologize for that. There's nothing, I'm not sure. It might just be an internet thing that's happening. Okay, so that's Okay. And that may be, yeah, and that may be an internet thing. And again, I apologize for that, Kathy, although it's not, it's just, unfortunately, that might be what's going on. So on this article that I'm mentioning, a lot of discussion about collaboration, very detailed, very important. And I encourage you to read it. Even if you're not an academic, some things in here that there's some good takeaway. Even if you're doing journalism, advocacy, and so forth. So, for instance, even, and we think about this, obviously police have to do this and lawyers have to consider this, but, even as we're considering, journalistic views and advocacy views and, crisis management, that's other government officials or people in the private sector who may be doing that. Even the idea of like reconstructing, and it's not always crime scenes, although that might end up being a part of it. So this, we've talked about context and the importance of context, right? And so in the case of a person who goes missing, whether they choose to go missing or something that has happened to them that is criminal, right? There's certain elements of, sort of, to the extent possible, in terms of fact and inference and analysis, right? Reconstructing or understanding aspects of what that person did or might have gone through. That's something, of course, that involves aspects of science and social science. Yeah, I know, Kathy, that is something. I don't know. I'll make sure to have a conversation with Ed about that, in terms of how the phone situation may have played into that, or it could have been a fluke. Yes, it's hard. It makes it very difficult to do that, and I understand that. But that's something, to the best extent possible, we'll try to deal with. So, just the idea, to the extent possible. So even in a, missing persons case where you don't necessarily have, like in some missing persons cases, things that might be part of a crime scene, and a lot of forensic science material, evidence available, or potential evidence. There are things that happen where people that are doing forensic science, etc., right, can be doing in terms of understanding and reconstructing and studying aspects of that missing person's life. And again, plus I also mentioned, right, the coordination of information between what we know about missing persons and what we know about unidentified remains. And of course, the world of DNA comes into that. So I am a couple other examples here. I just have a couple articles on there. This is from abcactionnews.com, and this is the title here: Identifying the Missing, How Forensic Anthropologists Have Used New Tech to Solve Cold Cases. And of course, when we talk about cold cases, that involves a variety of type of cases, including missing persons cases. So we talk about some of the different, disciplines that are involved. And this is from 2021 by Michael Paluska, right? A name familiar to a lot of people, right? The discipline, I'm quoting here the author. The disappearance of Gabby Petito shined a spotlight on missing persons cases, but forensic anthropologists at the University of South Florida have fought to get funding and solve these types of cases for more than a decade, and so forth. So, there's, when you talk about, human biology and physiology and culture and trying to, deal with human brains, there are obviously various scientific and social scientific disciplines that play a role in understanding the big picture of solving cases. But this is an interesting discussion in terms of forensic anthropology here, and I'm going to share that for sure. And then when we talk about, and I have here the Florida Institute for Forensic Anthropology and Applied Science. And so you can see here what sorts of work that they're doing, and that's the entity that's mentioned in the that I've shared and cited. And so this just gives you an interesting sort of what they're trying to do. And again, this is not just about this is not just about missing persons. But again, if you're thinking about sort of the big picture of dealing with remains, of dealing with what happened, you can see that they're involved. Like I have, if you click on programs, you'll see that they mention there, and there's obviously collaborations involved here. Right, Missing in Florida Day, statewide program to register and report long-term missing persons, collect biosamples and file reports across jurisdictions. So again, we're talking about coordinating information, data, and collaboration among persons and entities, right? What do I say? Collaboration is key. So that provides an example, and also want to mention here again, another area of forensic archaeology in missing persons cases. I have January 2019. And this is a citation in a book, maybe a chapter or a section. And again, the full text is not available online. It's in a book, Forensic Archaeology, right? That's another area. And this is from the use of forensic archaeology in missing persons cases, multidisciplinary perspectives is the chapter. Again, just the citation. Again, if you have access to an academic library or a local library, you might be able to get access to it. But again, the abstract, this is something that I do. I am going to look into this. There's some discussion here about research, and I don't have the expertise to comment on it as to where folks often are found or in terms of where they were last seen. There are things that can be examined to discuss these sorts of things with regard to forensic archaeology. I'm not an expert here. I'm not going to comment on it. I've not read this article yet, but the abstract interests me. And it is something that I want to look into as someone who does freelance journalism on cold cases. So it particularly involving also missing persons. And we're thinking here about forensic science in terms of missing persons cases. Just once in a while, we like to put an international perspective on the table. This is from Australia 2021, Radford and Glenday. This is a news, abc.net.au. I'm posting the link. They talk here about a dedicated forensics laboratory, missing persons cases, one step closer to resolution with new dedicated forensics laboratory. Again, a lot of this is having to do with unidentified human remains. So again, we're dealing with the idea of, coordinating the work of what we know, in terms of, and might know in terms of a missing persons case. And this is about the Australian Federal Police, but also with what we have, which again could vary in level of information about remains. But with the science of it, there are ways that we can make those matches and potentially solve those cases, or at least coming closer to solving those cases. Want to mention here what I think to be a very good big picture discussion about unidentified human remains here. And I'm just putting this here. Now, this is a ISHI, right? So this is the International Symposium on Human Identification. So that's their particular focus, right? So this sort of forensic science fits right into, of course, an interest in how do we think about, and I'm just looking here at this page and some things they feature. We're dealing with databases and coordination and collaboration among entities, governmental or otherwise. But how do we make this process better? Obviously, I'm just as a general matter, and maybe with regard to what's mentioned in this report, unidentified human remains and missing persons, a global challenge. Ken Doyle is the author here. So this is so it looks to be the author. The how do we make this process better? Now, of course, connected to what might be in this article, but also as a general matter, we know that there are a lot of legal, political challenges and actual concerns with things like DNA and other sorts of just like in the world of genealogy, right? Apart from any missing persons questions, right? Like a lot of people have been using DNA through entities online, and of course that could be very helpful. I've known of some cases, like, I don't mean missing persons cases, I mean people researching family history, where they've gathered a lot of information from it. And it's a research tool, but obviously there are real concerns about sharing your medical information. But on the other hand, we can see that when government and private entities are, collaborating and doing these things, that it can bring forward movement in solving various sorts of cases, not just missing persons cases. But when you're dealing with that sort of thing, especially if the government's involved, right, there's checks and balances and legal political issues. And again, not, as I always say, notwithstanding any political differences or viewpoints, right, that we can recognize that those are real concerns out there. Again, like with the some other things I've shared, Minnesota, okay, this is Georgia Bureau of Investigation, Division of Forensic Sciences, right, here we go. And so here, unidentified / missing persons. And I'm just going to read from the first paragraph. I'm going to read the first paragraph here. Identifying individuals who are unidentified at the time they are found and returning them to their loved ones is a core goal of the medical examiner's office. Methods used to identify an individual may include visual identification, dental comparison, prior medical intervention, unique identifying marks, and DNA. Unfortunately, there are times when an individual may remain identified. These remains are retained by the medical examiner office in a dignified manner until an identification is made. Again, I'm sure, well, I know across a lot of state areas, you're going to find different sorts of things like this. And you can see, if you scroll down, some other page that they link to on the side from their departments that would be also insightful. But in the case of unidentified remains, then I guess I could say by implication or necessarily, you have someone out there who's wondering where a friend or a loved one is. Now, there may be cases where certain people know, right, if they're involved in some sort of crime or whatever. But just as a general matter, let's think about this. So the importance, and again, I've mentioned NamUs and so forth, and we've talked extensively about that, but That's obviously a major example where you can take existing information. So the work of people doing the science and the work of people doing, right, the coordination and the publicizing of this information. Again, collaboration is key, for sure. Right. So there's an importance of coordinating that. Right. If we have unidentified remains, then there somehow, some way, right, that's going to have to be connected to someone who might or might not. I would say more often probably doesn't know where a loved one or a friend is. So that's important to consider. There are various examples that I can continue to provide, and I'm going to start talking about resources. Kathy, I know you've had some tech issues. YouTube's had some tech issues. Internet's had some tech issues, whatever it is. If there's anything you want to contribute, please do. And I understand it's frustrating when those tech issues happen. So I get it. So if you're just refraining from typing now, I understand completely. I wanted to start mentioning just some resources that, a lot of the things we mentioned are resources, right? We've talked about some things to define and give the scope of what is forensic science. I've made some recommendations on the front end from things pertaining to Unfound. They're still disappearing. Yeah, I'm going to talk to Ed about how, look into that, why that's happening. And we'll see if it might just be one of those internet things. So I will definitely take a look into that for sure, to the extent possible, what we can do to solve it. So, and I've recommended some things on the front end, particularly tonight, from Unfound, that's relevant. Previous episodes of this and some stuff from Ed and some episodes. But just back to forensic science in general, just some resources, because, if this is something that you want to learn more about, obviously we want to continue to go to credible sources. So let me add some things into the mix that can be helpful. This is from the texasattorneygeneral.gov website. And this is resources for law enforcement, but certainly it's provide some links, pages, so forth, that could be helpful to learn more, opportunities or learning opportunities for the general public, things that the public should be aware of. There's some resources at the bottom that are helpful to take a look at. It mentioned there, and I'm just see this on the site, and I'm not unfamiliar with this. Well, the DNA DOE project. That's. I don't want to comment on my familiarity on that now, but that's linked on this texasattorneygeneral.gov. It's a recommended resource there. That's DNA DOE project, DOEproject.org. That's again back to this idea of coordinating. Right, that's important. Identifying people. So that's just something. And then another one, American Academy of Forensic Sciences. Again, if you're not an academic, but you're interested in these things, that's okay. Obviously, in the world of forensic science, there are people, scientists, academics, law enforcement people, lawyers, various experts in different areas. If you go to if you click on the drop down, click on resources, there's a drop down menu. You'll see there's some very good things there that might be helpful just for your own study. Again, whether it's pertaining to missing persons or not, or in general, and you can do that. There's a list there. So I'll mention that. And if I go to the John Jay College of Criminal Science, they have a list of forensic science organizations and websites. And I have this is from their library, Lloyd Seeley Library, and I have that link here. And again, I like to use the chat. And then they have a specific section where they have organizations, which I'm going to put that here too, because that could be helpful. Again, for your study. I like to use this, one of the things I like about the YouTube option, and I guess I could have done it with Zoom, but it's a little more handy and efficient with YouTube, is in the live chat, I can, as at least one YouTube live media content creator says, drop the link. Right. So there it is. It's sort of because, and when we put these out here, the live chat's visible. So, and yes, of course, I'm still behind on emailing and updating the website with Ed and the team on our resource links on the unfoundpodcast.com. That's the data gems, but they're here. We're mentioning them. So if you're watching this, live, or you watch the recording later when it's distributed to YouTube, made public through Ed's channel, through the Unfound Podcast Channel, then there they are, right? So that's important. Again, if we want to study these sorts of things, right, we want to utilize credible sources. And then I have here too, this is the Consortium of Forensic Science Organizations. So it's an association of organizations in that area professionally. That's the cfso.org. And I'm going to put the link there. And I think that you'll see there's, and again, whether some of these sites have members only sections, but some of the organizational sites you can see have things that the public can access, and that you can see whether it's advocacy issues or expertise issues or collaboration concerns or opportunities. I see in some of these sites I've been sharing grant opportunities. Okay, so this is information that's important along those lines. And last but not least, of course, I want to, I like to put in the Journalist Toolbox, journaliststoolbox.org, and that's presented by the Society of Professional Journalists. This is not necessarily pertaining to, forensic science only, but issues of, things related to crime broadly. And then I also encourage you to go down to their topic list on the left. Of course, how many times have I mentioned this website? Again, not that this is necessarily going to be things that pertain only or primarily always in their resource list to forensic science, but certainly things in terms of journalism and media, I would say general citizenship that might overlap with material from with respect to forensic science, things that are forensic aspects in general, and the important work of being aware of and interested in missing persons cases, cold cases, the world around us with regard to actual crime, alleged crime, possible crime. Of course, prevention's an interest of ours, but more on that another time, like usual. Okay, Kathy, I know we're having some internet problems. Is there anything you wanted to add, if it can come through? And if you're reluctant to type, I get it. I absolutely get it. So nothing personal there. I completely understand. I'll continue. So we've covered a lot of ground. This was like all episodes, but definitely this one I was enthusiastic about. Again, I'm not a criminologist. I don't have the expertise type or set that Dr. Grace Telesco has. I'm not a forensic scientist. I'm someone who should have more of an interest in this if I'm going to be interested in any sort of cold case or missing persons journalism or advocacy or awareness. I would encourage you to do the same. As you're listening to this episode, think through some of the resources that we've shared. My apologies again to Kathy for whatever internet glitch was happening, YouTube glitch, etc. I'll make sure to communicate with Ed as to what was happening, to the extent possible that we can deal with that. Again, folks, please visit theunfoundpodcast.com. Any other questions? Yeah, let's try it. Kathy, I've talked about some resources. Are there any resources or cases other than what we talked about that you would suggest for us to get to know forensic science better? Any websites you like, or any books or publications or cases that we should key in on? And I'll give you a chance to type while we do this, for sure. So we've covered a lot of that ground. So, when you're watching this video, many folks will see this after it's been distributed. Take some time, go to some of the sources, and please share this video. Please share theunfoundpodcast.com. And that's important. Kathy, I'm giving you a chance to type, so no hurry. Take your time, please, for sure on that. This will give me a moment with no reference to anyone else specifically, but to emphasize an important point that's just such an important part of what Unfound does, what some of us who are involved in this community are interested in. Accuracy, quest for truth, research, analysis, avoiding sensationalism. Even recently, and again, I'm not mentioning anything, just so many things out there. There's a lot of great stuff on the internet, right? If you know how to find it for research, analysis, learning. But there's a lot of junk out there too, and then everything in between. It's so important, and I'm not mentioning anything, but based on things I've watched, and whether it pertains to, crime and justice or missing persons or otherwise, right? How sometimes even, okay, Kathy, there are all kinds of forensic websites. I didn't write them down. I've not done forensics research as a layperson. Understood. And I think a lot of times that's probably the case, or we latch on to one or two things, or we see something in a television program we get interested in. So I think this episode, with Ed and the team, and we were thinking about kind of getting an episode on this, hopefully for a lot of folks. Oh, this is good. I've done all kinds of research about taxpayers on my job. Kathy, you reminded me of something I forgot to mention earlier. Thank you. I've talked about the various forensic aspects of a case. We've talked about forensic science, and we've talked about missing persons cases where, okay, there might not be actual or potential crime scene evidence available right away. There might be things years later where remains are found. However, and keep in mind, and I, you talk about a case where someone goes missing. There's no body. They don't know if they chose to leave or they were made, to disappear, etc. But if you're trying, law enforcement in particular, but certainly people who are on the journalistic side, well, obviously context matters. Well, what about that person? Well, obviously law enforcement and experts can go through financial, study. Of course, for law enforcement to do this sort of thing, right, there are protocols and permissions, so forth, right? So like you mentioned, taxpayer research, that reminded me of what I neglected to mention, right? So even someone who would be going missing, there might be the case where law enforcement would start looking into certain, financial aspects of someone's life, or people around them that maybe were involved in that disappearance. My youngest sister explained some about DNA in the past few months. our ancestors. It's very technical. Yes, it is. And I will say this as someone who's very knowledgeable on amateur genealogy. I don't know a lot about the DNA side yet. I say yet, maybe someday I'll get more into it. But I can tell you a lot about examining documents and what websites to use, and a range of websites, and using old newspapers, and networking with second, third, and fourth cousins, and intensive genealogical research. But DNA is not an area that I know a lot about. I've talked to some people. I've read a little bit about it. I know some people that they've learned a lot from their family about it. But your taxpayers mentioning reminded me of this, right? So there are people that do forensic accounting and people dealing with financial records. So in a missing persons case, whether that's the person that's gone missing or persons around them and so forth, right? Whether it's business associates or family members or friends, right? There may be cases where that sort of analysis goes on. Because, right, at a very basic level, right, and family, law enforcement, certain things might become through documents or sourcing become public, or potentially part of the public knowledge of a case, right, which someone might have been involved with financially. So that's interesting. So those are two helpful points, Kathy. That's helpful. And of course, the DNA science, the DNA database discussions, they're only going to continue to be more heightened in the public mind. And so, okay. Again, the unfoundpodcast.com, folks. And again, Kathy will look into the technical side. Folks, I want to appreciate our time. If you're watching this later, she's been connecting DNA to people we're related to, talking to them on the phone, plus emails. Of course, that's the key, right? So if you're using a DNA database and you're involved in a genealogy website, and you start to see those connections, and then you have some other research going in terms of documents or newspapers or notes or interviews, and you start to really say, wow. And then the great thing about, and I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, Kathy, but that's okay, because I could talk about genealogy all day. And this sort of mindset and approach is helpful, by the way, if you're researching missing persons cases, right? Start to piecing together what you know, just as a research matter. But then you run into, you start talking to family members, that you talk to, and they're interested, and, maybe they're a third cousin, and they're like, yeah, I've always thought about genealogy and I've done some research. Well, hey, let's trade information. Let's collaborate, right? And so even beyond the DNA, people have information, family stories or photos or documents. I've mentioned genealogy. We've talked about it in our different researches. Obviously, I said I'm not a DNA genealogy expert, but I don't know. Maybe one time. Yeah, maybe we'll do an episode on genealogy for missing persons cases. We've talked about it for research. I've talked about, sort of building a framework or a profile and genealogy. And again, I know that research pretty well, but again, except for the DNA stuff, I'm not an expert. So maybe that'll be on our future possible episode list, genealogy. And certainly going into a new year, there's some things in my own genealogy interests for me personally, not having nothing to do with cold cases or missing persons. There's some research things I need to jump back into. And genealogy itself is fascinating. And yes, applied to these cases. And because of this, I've done a little bit more reading about the world of forensic genealogy. I mean, I've had a little bit of knowledge of it, not strong, but what it's about. And it is an area that I want to study more, just interestingly. And maybe, we've talked about more collaboration in the past, and, Some of the think tank folks have pushed discussions about, we haven't used the word crowdsourcing in a while, but collaborating. Maybe we can bring that more into the mix. Okay, Kathy, thank you. And thanks to those who are watching and will be watching. And again, the unfoundpodcast.com. Folks, again, thank you. This has been a great content coverage. Kathy, again, thanks for what you have contributed. We'll look into any tech issues. As I always say, someone out there knows something or knows someone who knows something. So let's keep that mindset going. Let's keep focusing on accuracy and good information and moving forward in the best way possible. Folks, again, this has been Unfound on the Ground number 15. Forensic Science for Missing Persons Cases. I'm now signing off. Have a great day, folks. Bye-bye.